the loss of a child under your home is probably so devastating. But if you don't do it, it's more devastating for them to just not have that love. Talk me through that, because to me, that has to be the hardest thing that you're doing, but you're also providing them so much love in their final days.
There are just some circumstances where the child just dies and doesn't necessarily have a family and doesn't have a name, and no one goes to a funeral and they're not missed and they're not loved. And for me, that was just not an option.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Abundant Hope podcast. Your host, Kate Glazer of Hope Rises. We are very, very honored to have on this week's guest, Cori Salchert. She is an incredible hope hero. We talk about hope heroes all the time, and she definitely fits that description. Just an amazing, incredible person who, prior to this podcast, I asked what her title was, and she said, Mom. As simple as that, but it's so much more than just a mom. She has her own children, but she also takes care of terminally ill or medically complex babies and really helps them in their journeys and just gives them so much love. She's joining us from Wisconsin. So, Cori, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Good to be here with you, Kate.
Thank you again. So take us back. I know that you've been in the media a couple of times, probably more than just a couple of times. You've been recognized across the world for all you do for babies and children. So talk about your story, where it started with helping children who are medically complex or even terminal. How did that all kind of start? And tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I would say that it probably started 50 plus years ago. So I'm 56, almost 57. And my little sister was profoundly handicapped. Spinal meningitis resulted in some severe brain damage when she was 4 months old. And so she had seizures almost constantly. And she was in a wheelchair and profoundly disabled. And so there was that familiarity there with my little sister, Amy. At that point in time, this wasn't something that keeping a child like Amy at home was encouraged at all. And my folks were told over and over again that it was something that they couldn't do this. And any supports that Amy received, my mom had to pack my two brothers and myself and Amy up in the car and drive 45 minutes to an hour to therapy, and then keep the three of us out of trouble while Amy was getting therapy, and then load us all back up and take us home again. And they didn't do any kind of home support services then. And so institution was the way to go. And so my sister was put in an institution when she was 5 years old. And she did end up learning how to walk and was able to learn how to feed herself. She was legally blind. One leg was significantly shorter than the other one. And so she walked, with a very spastic, uneven gait. And the thing about being put in that institution was that the thought at the time also, and this is why it's called medical practice, not absolutes, is that it would be better for us to not visit her. That Amy would bond with her new caregivers better if it wasn't complicated by my mom, especially coming to visit. And so Amy went when I was 9 to this home, and then we didn't see her again for an awfully long time. And then we would go and visit sporadically. But she ended up drowning when she was 11. She wandered off the Institute's property there and found a golf pond and drowned. And so there were a lot of things about that I thought, and if I could ever do so, I'd like to maybe do things a little bit differently. And I would not in any way be so bold as to say that I just do it so much better. My mom and dad did what they could with what they had, and it was made nigh unto impossible for them to be able to manage everything at home, where I have physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech therapists and nurses and physicians, and we have a handicapped access van. So we definitely have medically fragile children, but the better at home idea is in there now, and all those supportive services are in place in order to help so that families like ours can thrive, not just survive this kind of thing. But it all started with Amy all those years ago, that my affections towards her were such that I was not put off by her disabilities. And so that, for me, I'm a nurse, and 10 years ago, we first got into medical treatment, foster care. Our first baby we brought home in August of 2012, and she was born without most of her brain. She had the brain stem, and she lived with us, and she died at 50 days old, but she did not have to live wrapped in a crib in the corner of the NICU. So that started our journey, and we have had 9 children that we have fostered. 4 of them who've moved on to permanent placement, and then 5 of them have been ours, and 3 of them have since passed away. And then we have 2 children living with us right now who are adopted. We're not fostering anymore, but who are adopted. And Cassidy just turned 3 yesterday, and Charlie was 8 in June.
My baby's birthday is yesterday as well. So happy belated birthday to your daughter. Yes. That's amazing. I have so many questions for you. I'm a mom, so I feel like my mom heart is just so with you as you explain all of this. Do people still doubt you for doing this, or give you sort of that, why is it even something that matters? Do you ever receive this like negativity from people because they don't understand the complexity of what you're doing? Do you feel like that's come up?
Absolutely. That has come up. And I was talking with someone yesterday, and I said, it's funny because I can get 1,000 people who tell me, oh, this is wonderful. I'm so glad that you do this. You make a difference for these children, that, they have a home and they have a family. And yet that one person that wades in with something negative, and it's like, I just have a nerve that's tuned for that. And it gets a lot of playtime in my head. And I find myself justifying why it is that we would do this, and why they would be worthy of the attention and the love and the care and the concern and the energy that we pour into their lives. And so you bet. Everybody's got an opinion. And those that cannot see past the diagnosis and everything that's wrong are actually probably legally blind too, and maybe not medically diagnosed, but they don't see what we see. And so I can talk almost till I'm blue in the face and say, oh, well, he's reading at school, and like he went bowling, and he uses an eye gaze machine, and he can ride a trike. But they've shut their brain off, and they've walked away. They've determined that because what they can see with their human limited eyesight is all there is to the picture for them. And so then I try and be a little bit more careful, because it can sound like I'm trying to justify my children's existence. And so I don't want to waste a lot of energy pouring my heart out and explaining why my child is so wonderful. Because if they're not listening, it's falling on deaf ears.
Absolutely.
So you bet.
It's good to be positive. Absolutely. And just kind of ignore that, because no matter what you do, there's always going to be something that's negative, right? But
somebody can pick anything apart and find a negative. And so then to circle back around and go, that is their opinion, and God help them if they're ever in a place where they cannot take care of themselves and they're dependent upon other people, that there will be people there for them that don't say, yeah, but what are you going to do for me? Or I'm not going to help you, kind of thing, because my children are not going to get a job. They're not going to support me. But this is an opportunity for us to love unconditionally. We talk about that, but what does that look like in real life?
Yeah. Yeah. And you were a mom prior to then adopting or fostering. So
Yes,
how
many
has
times
your
over.
yeah. So talk about the impact on your family that you had prior and how this has really changed them as well, because I'm sure it's opened up their hearts to so many different things they never expected.
Right. Well, we have 8 biological children, and I would watch infomercials when I was pregnant, and it would be on orphanages in Bulgaria or Ukraine. And it was like, oh God, you know what? I would be willing to go and get one of those children. It's expensive to do that, and those children are absolutely worth it, but I'm really not very crafty. If you needed a closet organized, I can do that. But crafting things to be able to sell them so that you can raise funds. I have friends that do that, and my hat's off to them. It's a lot of work. Nobody accidentally adopts. So my heart was open and willing, but that did not end up coming about for us until my baby, my biological baby, was almost 11. Emily's almost 21 now, and Emmalynn came to us when she was not quite 11, 10 years ago. And it has had a very overwhelmingly positive effect. My children tend to be drawn more towards those who might need an extra hand. Do you need the door open for you? And they might seek out and actually speak to someone who has obvious disabilities more so than they would, because their awareness has been raised and they live with it. Sure. We do have a tendency to pick up a quote unquote typical child, and then we're very careful that we don't like disrupt a feeding tube or a trach, and that child may not have one. But we're so used to our kids having all of these extra special buttons on their bodies that we accommodate for that, even in kids that don't have it. So there is one of my kids has taken this and run with it and is a special education teacher in downtown Chicago. And so, she's done that. And a couple of my older girls have done mission trips overseas and are back and working with us now. And they just have the ability to run the kids to children's and find their way around there. And there's a familiarity as well as this is just what it is. And so there's not as much angst about it because we've just done this for so long that it's more normal for us and not a super stressful thing.
Guys, so when we first decided to do a podcast, the whole technicality of everything seemed daunting, to say the least.
Then we reached out to our friends at Social Chameleon. They helped us get launched, create our trailer, edit our intros and our outros.
All the details that goes into the behind the scenes to actually get the podcast out. You guys, they do it all for us, and it's been a breeze.
And then get this, they write all of your show notes and even publish each episode for you.
This has allowed us to get our podcast out onto all the most popular platforms, and I'm just so grateful to Social Chameleon for being able to make this happen for us.
And now we can focus on what we do best, and that's bringing you inspiring content, and they handle the rest.
With Social Chameleon, it's podcasting done for you. So go check them out at socialchameleon.us. Let them know that we sent you, and if you start a podcast using them, definitely let us know, and we'll tune in and give you all the support and love.
The word hope is just probably something that is so powerful to you. You are providing hope to these children when their parents probably love them so much, but just cannot wrap their brains around taking care of them and the complexity of their illnesses. So you're providing that hope when all hope is lost.
Yes, and it isn't just for the children, but also for their families. Because we did this through foster care. We're well acquainted with the families that our kids come from. And so there's the whole package deal. And there's hope that's provided for parents and for siblings. Cassidy's birthday was yesterday, and her mom and her brother both came to her birthday party. And it wasn't a matter of we're taking Cassidy in and shoving everyone else away when it's safe to do so. And it is not always safe to have the biological family remain involved. But when it's safe to do so, Cassidy is more oblivious. I think she knows who her mom is, but she's not cognitively aware enough to miss her when she's not here. But
Sure.
It is so important for her mom and for her brother that they remain involved because they know who she is. And yes, just keeping, we didn't take all hope of a relationship away when that child was adopted. Instead, our children have just ended up with a much larger family than they would have once upon a time.
And the loss of a child has to be so tragic, even if you have them for 50 days, 3 years, 2 days, whatever it is. The loss of a child under your home is probably so devastating. But if you don't do it, it's more devastating for them to just not have that love in their final moments, right? So is that sort of how you justify it? How do you deal with the loss of a child? And talk me through that, because to me, that has to be the hardest thing that you're doing, but you're also providing them so much love in their final days.
We had done a video for the Today Show, Today Parents, 6 years ago now, 6 years ago. And I had said in there that, that there are just some circumstances where the child just dies and doesn't necessarily have a family and doesn't have a name, and no one goes to a funeral and they're not missed and they're not loved. And for me, that was just not an option. And that's still true. My husband and one of my daughters was actually a grief share this morning, which isn't just a support group, but it's a 13-week curriculum to move you not just surviving your losses, but to come out on the other side with joy and not just a profound sense of sadness. And our 3.5-year-old died in December. We brought him home in May of 2019, not anticipating actually that he was going to have such limited time with us, but we did have 2.5 years. And he was a heart transplant baby, but then ended up dying from acute on chronic lung failure. And Nehemiah was able to spend more time out of the hospital than he did in, and he was able to go to the park, and he was able to ride a Jeep that was specially made for him, that he could just press a button because he didn't have the coordination to be able to use his feet, and music and people. And he had a home, and he had a Tupperware cupboard that he could pull everything out and throw it on the floor. And he had oxygen, and he had a concentrator, and he had a pulse ox, and he had a feeding tube. And I mean, he had all of that kind of stuff. But when you looked at him, what you really saw was just this vibrant, full of life little boy who did not have to live the entirety of his existence in a hospital room, living in a crib. And my nursing expertise, as well as a whole host of providers that really wanted him to be able to have a life outside the walls of children's, worked very hard to make that possible. And he came home on hospice last November and passed away on December 2nd, and right in my arms. And he knew that I was there, and eyes were open, and he was looking at me just before he took his last breath. And it's devastating. It is. But it would be so much worse if he had never had the ability to leave the hospital or not have a mom and a dad and a family. So choices were made, absolutely. And I've had to, quote unquote, sort of justify. I mean, I've had people who have told me that I was defying God by keeping him alive. And it's kind of like, well, I've worked so hard to provide a quality of life for that child in the days that he did live. And I didn't do that alone. And I do know that I have a hope beyond the grave. And that's what makes this doable. Because if this life was it, why would you willingly sign up for that kind of heartache on purpose? But it isn't just this life, and this is not just it. And we have a hope beyond the grave, and we will see Nehemiah, and we will see T-Bear, and we will see Emmalynn again, and all of that effort, that love that we poured into their lives for that short time will be worth it.
I love your heart so much. That is so, so beautiful. And I couldn't agree more. It's just, your heart is not just compassionate, but very strong. So just thank you for all you do. How can someone, just to round this out, how can someone support you? Or is there any way that they too can be a foster for a medically complex child? What is your best recommendation for those listening who maybe want to try that themselves?
If there's any interest in being it's termed medical treatment foster, and we were licensed through the social services arm of Children's Hospital. That doesn't mean that a local foster care agency, if you called up and said, I'm really interested in children with treatment, medical treatment needs, as opposed to general foster care or maybe behavioral. Ours were medically complex, not necessarily behaviorally complex children. And by all means, call your local human services Department of Children and Family Services, and they can get you directed to where the closest social services arm would be to be able to take care of medical treatment, and start there, because children with life-limiting terminal prognosis don't come up every day. And that's another reason why, we had 9. Our kids all came to us medically needy, and 4 of them got all fixed up and are doing great. So we weren't just stuck in, this is the only kind of child that we would have. So that would be the first place to get started, is just call your local foster care agency and let them know that this is your background, this is what you're willing to learn about, this is, and then get started on that fostering journey. And then be prepared, because fostering is always about reunification and keeping families together, not about adoption. So you've got to be able to embrace a whole family and all of those dynamics that go along with it. And if you're not, then this might not be your cup of tea. So just know that ahead of time, so you're not so that you don't set yourself up for disappointment. And the other thing, as far as if there is someone that would be tangibly wanting to reach out for us right now, I'm going to just share a quick story. So we had a teenager that came to us in 2017, and he was 13 at the time. He had vanishing white matter disease. And so his brain was dissolving and disappearing. And he died in October of 2018. And that situation, there had been a termination of parental rights, and Mom was incredibly hostile, and it was not a safe situation. And so she was out of the picture, and I put a gravestone on my husband's, Charlie's, and T-Bear's grave that had his adoptive name on it. And then come to find out, his mom found the site and left a Spider-Man doll there and has been back to visit. And I told my husband, I'm in a position where I have the right to just totally determine what is put there on that grave. I have that right. Mm-hmm. But I also have the power in my hand to do good on behalf of T-Bear's family. And so there's not a stone directly on T-Bear's grave, where I would like to be able to put a stone there with his birth name on it, so that when his family comes to visit, it's already grievous enough that their child died, but to see their son's name that they gave him, I have the right to be able to put whatever I want on his grave. And so I have been thinking about getting that done because I'm still in process of getting things finished for Nehemiah Stone, which is directly west of T-Bear. And so that's something, if they would like to help with that, then great, because it is about the families and not just the children.
We are a nonprofit, so please keep us posted. We do projects called Give Hope campaigns, and things like this are the perfect fit for a Hope Rises Give Hope campaign. That's one thing I don't think people realize when they come to our site, that we are also a nonprofit and we're raising tons of money for different causes across the world. So keep us posted on that, Cori. That sounds amazing. And I think every family deserves to have a space that they feel at peace to really visit and talk to and really find comfort. So keep us posted. We are happy to help push that out there, try to raise money ourselves. So we would love to help you. Thank you so much for all you do. I was so happy to get you on the Abundant Hope podcast through Hope Rises Network. And thank you again. We'll have all of your different contact information in our show notes. And I appreciate you coming on board and sharing your story.
Sure. And thanks for having me.
Thank you, Cori. Have a great day. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another beautiful story of hope and love. And we can't wait to have you back. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and allowing us to inspire you today.
We want to get to know you and learn why you need abundant hope in your life.
Follow us and engage with us on social media. You guys, we would love to connect with you. And you can start by finding us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, by searching Abundantly More,
and also Hope Rises Network.
We will add all of our social links to the show notes below, and we would love to hear from you. So please come, give us a follow, say hey, let us know you heard the podcast, let us know what you want to hear. We would absolutely love to hear from you and connect with you.